Good morning, afternoon, or evening. I am Stephanie Joy with All Things Social Security and the attorney at Joy Disability. You're about to see what should be a question and answer format type of chat from our live session on a particular topic that we find that a lot of people keep asking about. So I'm sharing it here. If there are pieces that could have been added that weren't added during the live, because there's a kind of a fast-paced Q&A that we do every Wednesday at 1 p.m. You might just find that I added something to the end of it to give it a little more clarity and a little more details for those that are interested in that particular topic. So check to see if that's at the end. Otherwise, enjoy the video. Bye-bye. I'm glad we went over agoraphobia, 5 years with symptoms. Oh, yeah. It comes in so many different packages too, right, La Rocha? I mean, I've known people who literally, there's so many I'm not even going to say, sure, if I had someone who never, ever, ever left their house. I had one that the only time he left his house was to drive the spouse to work and came right back in the house. So it is true that sometimes there are exceptions when the person needs to do something. And that's what I think makes it optically difficult. However, it's a mental disorder, so it can act wonky. There were so many other things that screamed. It was more than just agoraphobia, by the way. There was severe paranoia. I would say almost like delusions. So it was getting kind of hairy. LaRocha says, I never get out of my apartment. Do you literally never get out so you don't go to the doctor? That makes for a tough case. Or do you mean I don't get out of my apartment to socialize it? Do you go to the five and dime? Is that even a word anymore? Do you go to the grocery store or the convenience store? To the doctors? That's getting out of the house. There are people who are very socially reclusive, and it's not the same thing. It might have a little tinge of it though, but I think they call it a social phobia, or see different words. But the Rocha says, anymore I was an outgoing person to treat my anxiety. Kathy Clayton's in the house. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Stephanie. All right, guys, we're at the 2 hours and 8-minute mark, so we're a little over time here. There's not like a slew of questions, so I think it's a good time to cut out. Tasha, what do you say? Watch, if I do this, she's going to go, what are you doing? Oh, let's see. Sorry, I was just saying hi. Hi. Yeah, she'll wake up, it's like she has PTSD. She did a weird thing to a friend of ours, my daughter's significant. Well, Lulu's in the house. I got to take this one. Hold on a second, guys. Well, Lulu, how are you, my dear? Question. Does DLI extend automatically when adequate income, tax forms, and SE tax payments are correctly done with the IRS filing? Yes. I'm going to say yes as a general thing. Let me just read the rest. Cannot view SS statement or work credits on SSA site during appeal stage. This is not true. You can get into that and get your earnings statement. You cannot get your estimated benefit. So you can get in there, tool around. You can get your Social Security annual earnings statement. Okay? That's a fact. So make sure you get it. And yeah, if you are working, and this is what we talk about with the DLIs, when they're going to be expiring, everyone's is going to expire if they stop working, all of us. So if you're in danger of that and you're trying to prove a case, and you have a case that's a little tougher than other ones, which is a lot of you, if you can somehow do a job that does not show you can do any other job full time, and fully pay the taxes and all the money, don't start trying to write off all your mileage and stuff, get some work credits in there. I had the challenge today of explaining to somebody the very high threshold of medical evidence that is needed for a mental health impairment that would rise to the level in and of itself of making someone disabled. So excluding any physical impairments, let's for the moment assume there were no physical impairments and it's purely severe mental health issues or condition or disorder. And interestingly, I'm doing this on a day, it is Memorial Weekend, and I just want to wish everybody a very meaningful and memorable Memorial Weekend. I don't want to say happy Memorial Weekend. I think we've been saying that for too long and it seems a little inappropriate. But anyway, a good Memorial Weekend to everybody is my wish. Okay, so going back to it, let's assume someone for the moment is under 50, because that's going to be where the highest burden is to prove someone is unable to do all of the occupations that exist in the national and regional economy in substantial numbers, because that is the burden. Okay, and there are no special little age-related loopholes, if you will, for those under 50. So if someone comes to me and has a mental illness diagnosis and they are sure, or it's their loved one perhaps that comes to me, they don't believe that person is going to be able to sustain a job. They've been trying perhaps and have been unsuccessful due to the symptoms of their disease or disorder or condition. Okay, so let's say it's schizophrenia. And I think we're going to have, or we had a recent video on the listing level for that. But let's look at the evidence that would help show it could get someone to a listing level, or the more traditional residual functional capacity method of proving disabled. A diagnosis will not do it. If you're thinking otherwise, watch the video on why a diagnosis will not do it. Okay. So there are ways, there's evidence that exists oftentimes for those with very severely symptomatic mental health condition. And these would include things like, and it's very, very acute evidence, things such as durational partial hospitalization program that they go to multiple days a week, every week, for as long as necessary. And again, if it becomes unnecessary, that might mean that the condition is well controlled on medications and they are not disabled anymore. They're just impaired, and it's treated, and treated well. So current and ongoing partial hospitalization programs, combined with any or all of the following. There may be relapses that require psychiatric admissions 1 to 2 times a year at a minimum. Could there be a year where that doesn't happen? Of course. So this is all very general, but inpatient psychiatric admissions, not the 3-day check, but something more durational. Could it be a multitude of 3-day checks? Yes, possibly. So remember, none of this is carved in stone, but I'm just referring to what would be the kind of evidence a lot of lawyers are going to be wanting if someone who's under 50 and has no physical problems. And even if they do have physical problems, but those are not disabling in and of themselves from all jobs, even sedentary. So if we're going just on the medical, partial hospitalization, repeat periodic inpatient psych admissions, the medications, that would be what we would see with such a disorder. Let's say it's schizophrenia with a little psychosis. We would expect to see antipsychotics being taken and not being ignored. I know sometimes people stop taking the medication because it doesn't make them feel good in a different way. That can be a double-edged sword. Frequent or not infrequent need to adjust medications because they cycle out of them. They don't work for long. They might work sometimes and then they're not. That is a big sign of a person who has there's limited control over his or her condition. So that would be positive evidence, although it's not positive for the person's health, of course. So when I talk about everything, it's about the evidence, and what makes good evidence does not necessarily, and usually does not mean that it's favorable for someone's, healthy forecast. Unfortunately, that is the nature of this beast. And forgive my hoarseness. I don't know if it's allergies or whatever. I don't smoke, so it's not a smoking voice. Although I did smoke when I was younger, stupidly, but it's been a good 20 years. Okay, what else with the mental health? Being willing and going to at least weekly talk therapy with a trusted therapist. Sometimes they lose a therapist and they don't like the next one, and then they go for a year without. That's not going to be helpful to a case, particularly if going without, there's not a bunch of relapses as a result. So, how badly off are they? That's what we're trying to show, that the person can't work because they're not stable enough. If they are doing just fine, then they might be stable enough to go back to a simple, unstressful, is any job really unstressful? That I would argue, but routine 1-2-step direction, very simple, unskilled work. So it doesn't matter if you've had training in anything ever. Okay. You don't have to have gotten through the 8th grade. Complying with the, medications management reasonably well, and it's still not being well controlled. Other forms of evidence can be evidence that's not medical, but it's pretty objective. Like if there's been brushes with the law due to impulsivity, lack of control, poor judgment, poor insight, those arrests, get documentation of that. And again, it's going to have to be in the more current time frame. The treatment has to be current, period. It's got to be now and going forward. It can't be something you point to 4 years ago to show that the person has the condition. The condition probably won't be the thing that's in dispute. Usually that's the easiest thing to prove, as long as they, go to a doctor. But it's that ongoing treatment that shows the continuing nature of how unstable, tenuous it is. If they have a very structured home environment where there's oversight over them, someone keeps an eye on them, that can be indicative of a person who needs to have that oversight, right? I mean, if you need to have oversight and supervision when you're not under the strains of working, when you're at home and you don't have a job, what might that mean in terms of the supervision you'd need on a job? Because despite the fact that they say there are low stress jobs, we all know that just attending to work in a reliable fashion can be a level of stress on most people, well dealt with by most people. But then when someone has struggles with that, that is a higher level of stress on them. Medications management, that would be the doctor who's doing the prescribing, since a therapist probably isn't. You're going to want both. When it comes to a more severe mental illness, one that's actually in of itself making the person disabled versus reducing their capacity to do skilled work with others on a frequent basis, it'd have to be the one that takes out all jobs. And that's the one that they can't do the things that every job entails, such as being able to interact appropriately with coworkers and supervisors. If there's a substantial loss in that ability, not just a mild loss where they have to keep it, only occasionally they have to deal with them. If they can't even do that occasional, they're that tenuous, maybe that off the handle, unpredictable, that would be perhaps the type of level of symptoms that would cause someone to have substantial loss in the ability to interact with coworkers and supervisors. So it has to be a substantial loss in that ability. But if that's what the medical records are saying, or, when you ask the doctor, does he have a substantial loss in the ability to interact with others, not just the public and strangers, but coworkers and supervisors? It could be because a low threshold of tolerance for others. Depending on his mood, it could be severe moodiness, that impulsivity we talked about. Some people may, for mental health reasons, lack a filter and the ability to, not go off the handle, when the impulse is there, the lack of control. Another requirement is that there has to be an ability to maintain a semblance of attendance to show up for work. If there are psychological symptoms that would prevent someone from showing up to work multiple times a month, or they're going to go in very late, that might be something that interrupts and is a substantial loss of the ability to do that. If a person can't adapt to routine workplace changes, nothing major, but when things change up at work and there has to be a change, maybe they move, work spaces or a process in that 1-2-step process of a simple job. If the person would have a very difficult time and would not be able to perhaps make that adjustment without a big hullabaloo and interrupting the whole workplace, that lack of ability to minorly adjust to typical adjustments that have to be made at work would be potentially something that would eliminate all jobs. So that's kind of probably a video for a different day when we go through all of those things. But the point of this video is about the evidence needed to show that those things might not be available for a person. They might be substantially lost. I think I was just talking about the legal ramifications. Sometimes there could be fighting, brawls, road rage, shoplifting, believe it or not. If a person has, 1, 2 more, because they're not able to control their decision-making in a responsible manner, that can be a strong piece of evidence, even though that's not medical evidence. So that's a very good piece of non-medical evidence. Third-party statements can be helpful. They're not medical evidence either. And obviously when they're coming from family, there is that little edge of conflict. It's allowed though, but it's just not going to necessarily hold the same weight by the fact finder or the judge, because the family cares and the family is emotionally involved. But there could be others. Like for instance, if you can get your hands on a coworker where they used to work and how that job ended. Let's say it was because of a brawl. Let's say it's because he would fly off the handle, or let's say he or she would break down and cry, or would be talking to themselves because they were hearing voices or seeing things. Third-party statements as to what they witnessed, particularly if it's a non-family member, but it can also be family members. But the more you can get that's not family or not someone emotionally attached with a conflict there, can be helpful. So again, the need for the weekly therapy and the regular mental health treatment is very important. But just regular garden variety counseling with medications management when all's going well, that is not going to be a winner. I think most of us would find, because not to prove that the person is mentally disabled from all jobs. Okay. It has to be something more. It's got to be where that isn't enough. They still have to go to the hospital with these relapses, psychiatric admissions. It could be ER visits. It could be the police have to be called because the person's out of control. And then there might be a hospital visit as a result or not. It has really got to be really robust and current ongoing. If it's not current ongoing, then there's no evidence of a current ongoing severe problem. The belief will be that there's a problem, but guess what? Most workers have mental health issues, I think, in this day and age. So you have to be able to set yourself apart as to why your mental health condition or your loved ones is so severe that they cannot sustain even the simplest, easiest job on a sustained basis. That means full-time and on an ongoing basis. And I want to say the general rule would be 6 months for that. So if they try and they keep getting the boot within, 2-3 months, that could be indicative. But it would be good if one can get the reason why the job didn't work, not from the person themselves necessarily alone, but from the employer. Again, it happens a lot where someone gets fired because of their attitude. And we're trying to show that it's not just attitude. It's a symptom of the medical condition and the fact that it's not well controlled. Okay, so mental health as a younger person, when that is the only thing you have, and even if it's not, because just the way things go with the under 50 crowd, if the physical condition is not very disabling, bedridden, wheelchair bound almost, the mental health will not push it over the edge unless it would probably in and of itself. That's how severe it's got to be. Now, when we're over 50, there are other rules in play so that someone doesn't have to be disabled fully by their mental, but the little bit that the mental reduces in their ability to do skilled work or unskilled work can make the difference. That's a whole different issue, though. I'm just talking about the evidence needed to show that it's a severe and disabling mental condition in and of itself. Okay? Really, really major evidence, guys. It is huge. Pardon my dog. Buddy. Anyway, I hope that helps. If you haven't started to get this, but the shoe fits, you've got to start. You've just got to make it your full-time job. Get that treatment, so that those documents are all going to be there in a year from now or 6 months from now. And we don't want to see people going into psychiatric admissions. So I don't think it's impossible if they're now stable enough not to do that. But there's going to have to be evidence of the fact that it's very severe. And this garden variety counseling every week or two isn't going to do it. So that counselor has got to be very astute about how much they have to be on top of you, how strong those medicines are, how difficult it still is, but you're maintaining. And a sheltered lifestyle, if you are well cared for in a sheltered home life with family or in a halfway house because you can't do it on your own, that would be huge evidence too, that you need to be very sheltered. When you go out in public, perhaps you always have to have someone with you, but that's going to have to be described by the medical provider, not just you, because what we say and you say is not medical evidence. So we need these medical providers to be very articulate and care enough to share those facts. Okay. And not to use the HIPAA carve out about psychotherapy records to avoid actually explaining the other things they're supposed to talk about, which is diagnoses, symptoms, mental status at every session. Those things are what can really bring forward a case and provide the evidence needed without the need for psychotherapy records of the details of the conversations, not necessarily, but they can certainly speak to if the person hallucinates, audio, visual, very, very important. That's a big sign of instability. Okay, guys, if I think of any more, I'll put them together and share them to you. Be well now. And again, Memorial Weekend. I hope you have a good one. Hug those that are near you. Bye now.